Hello, everyone. My name is Don, the movie reviewer, and today we're going to be reviewing Spider-Man Far From Home. So, Spider-Man Far From Home kicks off after the events of Avengers Endgame. Tony Stark is dead. He used the gauntlet to snap his fingers and turn Thanos and all of his minions into dust, and Peter Parker watched him die. I thought that the whole storyline with Peter Parker grieving over the death of Tony Stark could have been done a lot better. I don't feel like Peter Parker was grieving enough in this movie. I felt like there should have been a whole lot of story built into this where Peter Parker is extremely grieving over the death of his mentor, father figure, Tony Stark. I don't feel like this movie really hit that message home. I feel like they could have done so much better with Peter Parker having to deal with Tony Stark's demise. One thing in this movie that Homecoming didn't touch on was the fact that Peter Parker does act reckless. There are moments in Homecoming where he's changing his clothes in public, and Aunt May catches him at the end of that movie, and so that bleeds into here with Aunt May knowing the identity of Spider-Man. It's Peter Parker. And then we also have MJ in here, who wasn't revealed to be MJ until the very end of Homecoming. And so in Far From Home, MJ knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and she just admits that. And the movie also touches on things that were bothering me in Homecoming, where when Peter Parker would disappear, there would be no consequences to his actions. And in this movie, it's the same thing. There's no consequences to any of his actions that happen. The students and the teachers just completely are oblivious to, hey, Peter Parker's missing. What should we do about it? But the movie does point it out, and that's a smart thing to do because, I feel like a lot of people, including myself, were griping about that in Homecoming, and so they mention it in here. But I feel like just because you mention it doesn't mean that you can get away with that. Like, yes, this is a movie and this is fantasy, but the beauty of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, especially Spider-Man 2 as an example, is Peter Parker having to balance out being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker and going to school and having a job, right? He's trying to do this balancing act. And in Spider-Man Far From Home, they sort of do that exact same thing where he wants to reveal his feelings to MJ, and yet at the same time he wants to be Spider-Man and save the world, but then he feels that being in love is more important. And so the movie does illustrate that, but I don't feel like it really pushes that message home of Peter Parker having this responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, and this movie does have that element in it. But the same thing with Peter Parker grieving over Tony Stark's death, it's just sprinkled in here, and I don't feel like Far From Home really has a deep story within this movie that expresses this fact that, yes, Parker is trying to do a balancing act. He's trying to figure out how to express his feelings to MJ, and he's trying to, be Spider-Man at the same time. And I just feel like the same thing with him dealing with the death of Tony Stark. They could have had a lot more deep story meaning to it, which they didn't have. And so going forward with that, I feel like this movie, it has a lot going for it. And Mysterio is another thing. The Mysterio character played by Jake Gyllenhaal, Mysterio is a handsome man, and yes, he looks fantastic. His suit looks awesome, and when we see Mysterio show up at the beginning of this movie, it is amazing. It's interesting because when we see him, he's talking about these elementals, this water, fire, and earth, and the things that are in nature. I don't really understand it. I don't know what it is. I just know what the movie explained to me. I don't remember all of it because at first I seriously thought that, okay, yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal, Mysterio's being serious. He has to fight these elementals. And I like the twist in this movie. The twist in this movie is that Mysterio is an employee of Tony Stark's, who, when they show a flashback of Captain America Civil War, when Tony Stark was talking about his barf, idea, we see that Tony Stark took that idea from him or something like that. I can't really remember it. But we get that little bit of illustration as to why Mysterio's doing what he's doing. And so it makes sense because he's upset. And then so he has this whole scheme to use this illusion, this technology, these drones, to create this illusion of these elementals attacking where Peter Parker and his schoolmates are, and they're attacking the city. And then Mysterio shows up and he's like, "Oh, I'm here to save the day." And then he's talking about a multiverse. And at first that intrigued me. I was thinking to myself, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a multiverse that Marvel's going to be presenting here." And he's talking about, "Oh, I'm from a different Earth, and then my Earth was destroyed," and all this stuff. But then once they do the reveal, now it makes me think, okay, now everything Mysterio was saying was a lie. There is no multiverse. That was all bullshit. So there's no multiverse. It's not a thing. There is no multiverse. Mysterio was just using these drones to create this illusion so that Peter Parker could get Tony Stark's glasses, and then, with great power comes great responsibility, and Peter Parker in the MCU feels like he can't be the new Iron Man. He doesn't want this responsibility. He just wants to be in love with MJ. And then so he gives the glasses to Mysterio, who planned this whole thing, and Peter Parker doesn't know this. And I felt that could have, Mysterio's whole problem with Tony Stark and him wanting to get the glasses, I feel like that story could have been a bit deeper. It wasn't enough with that either, but it was a nice twist. And then so, Peter Parker gives Mysterio the glasses, and he have this sadistic smile from Jake Gyllenhaal. He's a fantastic actor. And then he's celebrating, and there was a really good scene where he's celebrating with his barmates, and it shows all of these flashbacks from like first Iron Man movie, when Obadiah Stane, Jeff Bridges' character, was yelling at this guy about Tony Stark building an arc reactor. And so all that stuff is great. So it's giving us some illustration as to what these villains' purpose are. So that's interesting. So it's giving us a little bit of illustration as to why these villains are doing what they're doing, but I feel like it just could have been deeper. So then once they do the reveal as to who Mysterio actually is and his whole scheme, that's when the movie gets interesting to me, because then, he's like, "Get this stupid suit off of me." And then, Peter Parker, he just wants to be in love with MJ. And so then Mysterio's like, "I'm going to be the new Iron Man. I'm going to be the new savior of the universe," and all this stuff. He has these grandiose plans. Then Peter Parker figures out what Mysterio's plan is by finding one of the pieces of a broken drone, and he figures out the plan. And so then, he tries to confront Mysterio about it, but then Mysterio, the heroes and the villains fight, and all that stuff. And Mysterio has a plan to kill Nick Fury, but then later on we find out that actually wasn't Nick Fury and Maria Hill. It was actually two Skrulls. And to me, I will say this. There's this whole thing going around where Dark Phoenix, the new X-Men movie, had to change its third act because it was mirroring the end of Captain Marvel too much. And I don't know the ins and outs of, these productions, but I have a feeling that what if Captain Marvel, this is a what if Captain Marvel actually knew that the X-Men movie were going to have the Skrulls in there, and they were going to film this whole big grandiose third act, and then all of a sudden Marvel was like, "You know what, we're going to do it first." And they took their idea, because Avengers Age of Ultron had Quicksilver, and the X-Men Days of Future Past had Quicksilver. And Marvel's the juggernaut. Marvel, the MCU's the juggernaut. So we're thinking, oh yeah, Marvel's are going to do a grandiose Quicksilver. And to me, Quicksilver in Age of Ultron sucks. And Days of Future Past Quicksilver is way better. And so maybe Marvel was being upset. And so I feel like when I see Captain Marvel, I don't feel like the Skrulls were really necessary, because they're not doing anything. I'm thinking, oh yeah, there's gonna be like a secret wars, or the scrolls are gonna have some major importance in Endgame, and they were just wasted. Yeah, it's a good twist of what they did with the scrolls. They were pointed out as being evil, and then the twist is that they're actually good people. That was a nice twist. But in the context and the grand scheme of things, as a whole, they mean nothing. They're just there. And then they're used in here in Spider-Man Far From Home as just like an afterthought. Like, oh, the scrolls are here. And it actually wasn't Nick Fury. And the whole entire time, I'm thinking after the events of after the events of Captain America Winter Soldier, I feel like Nick Fury and Maria Hill have no importance anymore. Like when I'm seeing Nick Fury after the events of Winter Soldier, I'm like, well, what is he doing? And when he showed up in Age of Ultron, I was like, okay, this is just, yeah, you're trying to mirror what happened at the end of the first Avengers, but you're bringing Nick Fury and Maria Hill back, and they just happen to have a helicarrier for some reason. And so I don't feel like Nick Fury and Maria Hill really need to be here. And so that's what I was thinking throughout this entire movie in Far From Home. I was like, why are Nick Fury and Maria Hill here? They don't need to be here. And since they're here, what agency are they working for? I'm just confused. And then it's just revealed that they're Skrulls. And so I'm like, okay. So then the after credits scene in Far From Home is that Nick Fury is on a Skrull ship, and him and the Skrulls are working together. And we'll see what that leads into in Phase 4, if anything, because the Skrulls have no importance, and neither does Nick Fury and Maria Hill. But yeah, so moving on with the story Far From Home, Peter Parker and Mysterio have their face off, and heroes are triumphant. Spider-Man kills Mysterio, and I thought that happened kind of fast. Like there's a lot of interesting story elements in here, but I don't feel like they're deep enough to really hold my interest. Like let me rephrase. I don't feel like the stories are deep enough to actually make me emotionally invested in what's happening. I'm interested, but then the story doesn't go deep enough to make me feel emotionally invested by the end. By the end of it, I'm like, yeah, that was good, and I like this better than Homecoming. But reality is that these stories, Tony Stark, dying, and Peter Parker grieving over that could have been so much deeper and so much more emotional. They only have a couple of scenes of it. And to me, Peter Parker is going throughout the movie not really giving a rat's ass of what happened to Tony Stark. It's only in a couple scenes, and then he forgets about it completely. And then we got Mysterio, who's a disgruntled employee, and he's, wanting to get even. And that's not a deep enough story. They do flashbacks, and then, he just goes on with his villain thing, and then he gets defeated. And then Peter Parker is obsessed with wanting to have a romance with MJ, but he's struggling at the same time to handle his responsibilities as being Spider-Man and being the new Iron Man, which he doesn't want to be. But then I don't feel like the movie goes deep enough with that either. It's just kind of like boom, bang, boom, here we go, thank you, ma'am, keep the story rolling, keep hitting these points, and then you reach the final climax, and then it's all over. And so I wasn't disappointed. I definitely like this more than Homecoming, but I just feel that the stories in here could have been so much deeper. There could have been so much more rich emotional depth with these characters in this movie. And the movie just didn't give it to me. And so my verdict for the movie on its own, before we get to the big reveal of the credits, the movie on its own, it's good. It's a good movie. It's good. I enjoyed the story, even though I wanted more from it. I wanted more rich emotional depth. I was interested, but I wasn't super invested by the end. So I was kind of disappointed, but I was like, yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good. But after the credits, we see, Nick Fury, and he's on the Skrull ship, and the Skrull reveal, I don't care. They're useless. But then we see that Mysterio was filming the final climax. He was filming the final fight between him and Peter Parker. And as Peter Parker defeats Mysterio and he calls off the drones, Mysterio reveals Peter Parker's identity, and he blames Peter Parker for the events of what happened with the elementals. And Mysterio dies a hero, even though he's really the villain. The general population, the public, believe Mysterio to be a hero, even though Peter Parker and Nick Fury and Maria Hill or the Skrulls know what actually happened. And so that's an interesting thing. So when I saw that, that made me go, okay, that's very interesting. I want to see what they're going to do in the third Spider-Man movie, if anything, because then the thing that I think about is that Marvel likes to do this all the time. They like to set things up so perfectly, like with, for example, Avengers Infinity War. Marvel had Hulk get his ass beat at the beginning of Infinity War by Thanos, right? And throughout the entire movie in Infinity War, he can't Bruce Banner can't Hulk out. So I'm thinking they're going to do some big story in Endgame where something dramatic is going to happen to Bruce Banner to make him want to turn into the Hulk again, like Black Widow gets killed in front of him by Thanos or somebody, and that pisses him off so much that it causes him to just rage out and be the ultimate Hulk, way more badass than he was in the first Avengers. And they didn't do that, and that's fine. But the explanation that they had in Endgame, they just glossed over. It's like, oh yeah, first Hulk lost, and then Banner lost, and then some stuff I did that isn't even in the movie. I'm just going to explain to you what I did. I merged the bronze and the brains together. And it's like, I guess so. That's what Marvel did. They set up these nice stories that could be a whole 30 minutes or an hour of its own story. And they just brush it off in a couple minutes and say, this is what happened. And so that's what I feel like what they're going to do with Spider-Man being set up to be the bad guy here. I feel like, yeah, it could be a whole entire Spider-Man 3 movie. They can really do something with this. Spider-Man, number one, being known to the population that, hey, it's Peter Parker, and two, he's labeled to be the bad guy. They could really do something with that, but I feel like with Marvel's track record, they're not really going to do anything with that. They're not going to progress that in any way, shape, or form. They're probably going to have a couple minutes of something and then they're going to gloss over it. But I'm interested. They got me. That's what Marvel, they hook you in, like with the Hulk situation in Infinity War, and what's going to happen in Endgame. Oh, nothing. Okay, whatever. Disappointed. And I feel like that's what they're going to do with this. But they got me, though. They got me. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully they do something with this, because I was like, okay, the movie was good, but that, Mysterio dying the hero and Spider-Man being labeled as the bad guy and the public knowing who he is, they could really do something with that. And hopefully they do in the next movie or something. But then the thing that really took it over the hill for me is when we see J.K. Simmons, J. Jonah Jameson in here. That really got me. And so when I saw that, it's like, okay, that made me label this movie as being great. That may be a stupid thing to do, to be like, this movie is great because, the after credits scene is what pushed it over the hill for me. The movie itself, before the credits, it was like, the movie's good. It could have been deeper with the story, but it's good. And then the credits roll in, Skrull thing's stupid, and then Mysterio dying the hero in the public's eyes, and then Peter Parker being known to the public as Spider-Man and being labeled as the bad guy was like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And then we see J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons. No one else can play that character. That really pushed it over the hill for me. And so with the credits and the movie as a whole, this is great. It is great. It could have been better, but it's great with the credits in there. And the movie by itself is good. And it could have been deeper story. But, other than that, I like it better than Homecoming. I really don't have a whole lot to complain about. Just, a couple of minor things that could have been tweaked. The story could have been done better, but I like the villain. I like the action. I like the story. Interesting, but it just could have been deeper. And hopefully, they do something with the whole Peter Parker reveal and being labeled as the bad guy. Hopefully they do something with that, because now you got me, and I'm looking forward to what happens next with Spider-Man in the MCU. And that's all I have to say. So as always, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.